A calm Sunday morning dawned over Vatican City as thousands gathered in St. Peter's Square, waiting to witness history in the making. The atmosphere was both electric and reverent as people from around the world held their breath for the first public address by the newly elected Pope Leo XIV. Cameras clicked, flags waved gently in the spring breeze, and a deep stillness fell across the crowd when the curtains of the Apostolic Palace slowly drew back. As he stepped onto the balcony, Pope Leo XIV appeared solemn yet warm, dressed in his pristine white robes, his hands clasped gently in front of him. Though this was his first public blessing as pontiff, his expression was calm and steady, as if he carried the weight of history with humility and quiet strength. The world had been watching since his unexpected election just a few days. Earlier, little was known about Cardinal Gabriele Conti, the man who had taken the name Leo XIV. Yet within hours of his appointment, discussions had already begun about the direction in which he might lead the Church. Would he be a reformer? A traditionalist? Or someone charting a new path altogether? Today's address would offer the first glimpse into his priorities and his vision. When he began to speak, his voice was soft but resolute, echoing across the square through speakers that carried his words with clarity and reverence. He greeted the crowd with a simple blessing and thanked them for their prayers. He expressed deep gratitude to his predecessor and the College of Cardinals, and then, without delay, turned to the theme that would define his first global message: peace. No more war, he said firmly, pausing after the words to let them breathe. No more hatred, no more children growing up with fear in their eyes, no more nations torn apart by violence. Today we must speak with one voice. No more war. The crowd fell into complete silence. The Pope's words hung in the air with weight and urgency. In a world grappling with armed conflict in several regions, from Eastern Europe to the Middle East, from Africa to South America, his call struck a universal chord. His voice was not raised, but the conviction in his tone carried more power than volume ever could. Pope Leo XIV spoke of the responsibility shared by every human being to become a builder of peace. He reminded listeners that peace is not simply the absence of war, but the presence of justice, compassion, and solidarity. He quoted the Gospel, reminding everyone that "Blessed are the peacemakers," and emphasized that this blessing is not reserved for diplomats or world leaders alone, but for parents, teachers, students, laborers, everyone. He acknowledged the pain of those who had lost loved ones in war. He spoke directly to mothers mourning sons, children orphaned by bombings, and soldiers struggling with the burden of what they had seen. His words were not political. They were human. He didn't point fingers or assign blame. Instead, he opened his arms to all sides, reminding the world that mercy and reconciliation are greater than revenge. Pope Leo XIV then surprised many by including a special prayer in his address, written in his own hand just hours before. It was a prayer for the world's leaders. He asked God to grant them wisdom, courage, and humility. Not the courage to conquer, but the courage to forgive. Not the wisdom to rule, but the wisdom to serve. Not the strength to destroy, but the strength to protect life. As the prayer was read, many in the square wept quietly. A group of children near the front held up a handmade sign that read, "We pray for peace." The Pope noticed it, smiled gently, and raised his hand in blessing toward them. For a moment, the political faded and only the spiritual remained. It was a moment of shared humanity. He then transitioned to speak about the role of the Church. He said that the Church must never be silent in the face of injustice and must always be a voice for the voiceless. He acknowledged past failures where silence or complicity had cost lives, and declared that under his leadership the Church would walk more humbly and more courageously. He emphasized the importance of dialogue, not just between nations, but between neighbors, between religions, and within families. Dialogue, he said, is the first step to peace. He called on Catholics and all people of goodwill to become ambassadors of listening, willing to understand others, even when they disagree. He quoted Pope John XIII saying, "We are not on earth to guard a museum, but to cultivate a flourishing garden of life." In a time when social media can divide more than it unites, when fear too often overrides compassion, Pope Leo XIV's call to unity was bold, yet refreshingly simple. He asked people to put down their weapons, literal and metaphorical, and Pick up their neighbor's hand. He reminded the crowd that every faith, every culture, and every individual can be a contributor to peace, if only we choose to act from love rather than fear. As the address neared its end, the Pope's tone grew. More intimate, he said, "I am not a politician, I am not a general, I am a servant. And I serve not just Catholics, but all of humanity." These words were met with thunderous applause from the square, and even many watching on screens around the world were moved. He then closed his address with a final blessing, his voice rising, just slightly as he looked out across the sea of people. "May the God of peace bless every heart that beats for justice. May every hand that reaches out for understanding be strengthened, and may our children inherit a world healed, not hardened." The crowd erupted into a long, heartfelt cheer that echoed through St. Peter's Square like a wave of shared emotion. Some held candles, their soft flames flickering in the breeze as symbols of hope. Others clasped their hands tightly in prayer, eyes closed and heads bowed. And many simply stood in silent awe, tears welling in their eyes, deeply moved by the magnitude of the moment they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a speech, it was a call that reached into the soul. As Pope Leo XIV turned to return inside the Apostolic Palace, he paused at the doorway. Then slowly he turned back toward the sea of people gathered below. For a brief moment he looked across the crowd as if locking eyes with every single person. Then, with a soft and humble smile, he raised his hand and offered a gentle wave. It was quiet, it was simple, but it was unforgettable. That image, the Pope standing against the glowing backdrop of St. Peter's Basilica, golden sunlight bathing the Vatican in warmth, quickly spread across news channels and social media. In a world often consumed by division and noise, the moment stood out like a whisper of clarity, a symbol of something deeper. For many, it wasn't just the beginning of a new papacy. It felt like the beginning of something better. A new tone, a new hope. World leaders across continents released heartfelt statements of support, many calling the Pope's words a much-needed moral wake-up call in an increasingly fractured world. Social platforms lit up instantly with hashtags like #StopNoMoreWar and the Chance Pope for Peace, spreading his message to every corner of the globe. While skeptics debated its impact, millions felt something stir within, a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, change was still possible. For the first time in a long while, people weren't just hearing words, they were feeling them. And that made all the difference. Thanks for watching StarSpotlight, where every story shines. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful moments from around the world.